Every year from 1973 to 2008, energy production went down in the Permian Basin. By the time we got to 2008, we were producing 710 million barrels a day. Now keep in mind, we've been producing 2.2 million. We had lost 2/3 of our oil production in 35 years. There were commentators at the time that were saying that when you flew over Midland those days and you saw those pump jacks that weren't pumping in those drill sites, that they resembled the tombstones in a petroleum graveyard. We have run some simulations that said, what if we kept drilling the same way, in the same places, in the same manner after that? And if we had done that today, we would be producing 460 million barrels a day. And by 2025, we'd be producing 460,000 barrels a day. And by 2025, 300,000 barrels a day. Keep that number in mind for just a second. 2025, 300 barrels a day. That's what we would have done if things had gone on the way that we thought they would. The pipelines that used to bring oil from the Permian Basin to the Gulf Coast were turned around to bring gasoline from the Gulf Coast to the Permian Basin. The refineries retooled to handle the heavier crudes from other places because they didn't think they were going to get much from here anymore. I mean, it was being written off. But something happened in 2008. Things turned around. There became a different way to get oil out of the ground. And by 2016, we had broken that record, which set the 35 years back in 1973. By 2016, just 8 years after we started drilling again, we had shattered that record. Today, it's 3.5 million barrel of oil equivalents right now. It's up 50% since 2016. We think, 10 or 12 other people who forecast think that by 2025, it's likely to be somewhere around 6 million barrels a day. Now let's think about that. If things had kept going like they were, it would be 300,000 barrels a day in 2025. It's likely going to be 6 million barrels a day. That's 20 times as much. That is revolutionary, and it has huge implications for the entire world. Let's go back and talk about the United States for a minute. In 1973, when the embargo started, the United States consumed 31% of the world's oil. That's a lot. We were producing about 60% of what we consumed and importing about 40%. But then we hit what was a very common topic in speeches I would give even 10 years ago, something called peak oil. The amount of oil produced every year started going down, and it's the same thing started happening in the United States. It was happening out here. And by the time we got to 2008, despite the fact we had brought the North Slope on in Alaska in between, which was a very big production area, despite that, we were down to only producing 36% of what we consumed. We had to import almost 2/3 of the oil that we consumed. And we were vulnerable because a lot of that oil had to come from places that didn't particularly like us. This was not a great situation for us in any way. And it seemed like a fairly desperate situation as it looked like we were continuing to run out of oil and continuing to run out of oil. And basically, you had major companies who were spending literally billions of dollars on the Gulf Coast and the Atlantic Coast to build huge facilities in order to import compressed and liquefied natural gas so we'd have enough energy to operate on. I mean, that was the situation we were in. In 2008, we're talking a decade ago, that's the situation we were in. Then things turned around. Today, we are producing 72.5% of the oil that we consume. Not 36%, we have doubled that market share. We were only producing 8.1% of the oil in the world in 2008. Today, it's about 15 or 16%. We're no longer using that 31% that we did in 73, or the 22.5 that we did in 08. It's about 20% now. So we're basically producing 15%, consuming 20%. Now we'll probably continue to have a deficit like that. We'll continue to export a little bit of oil, a little bit of crude, or excuse me, import a little bit of crude, because with Canada and Mexico situated where they are with some of the refining capacity, it just makes sense to bring some of it in from those places. But in terms of total petroleum, that is, when you include the refined products, the LNG, the petroleum liquids, and the petrochemicals and all that. A funny thing happened. Every year about this time of the year, the Energy Information Administration in D.C. publishes the annual Energy Outlook. And it's a thing that everybody wants to grab and read when it comes out. In 2017, 2 years ago, they told us, you know what? By 2026, we're going to be a net exporter of all petroleum products. And that was an amazing statement in 2017. Then they issued the one last year, about this time last year. They said, you know what? In 2022, we're going to be a net exporter of all petroleum products. And then they just released a week or so ago the new one. And guess what they said? In 2020, we're going to be a net exporter of all petroleum products. This is happening very fast. It's happening faster than the analysts can keep up with in terms of what's going on here. We are now the #1 oil-producing country in the world. That was inconceivable 10 years ago. And it's all because of what's going on right here. There's no other fields that come remotely close to that. So it is an amazing, remarkable thing that's happened